life heroes in relation to those that inspire books? Do they always have to be larger than life? What are the ways in which they may lend depth and substance to a fictional story? This discussion is being led by Miss Nandita Da Cunha. She is an award-winning children's book author based in Mumbai. After her MBA at XLRI, she worked as a strategy consultant with Arthur Andersen and KPMG for over 14 years. Before moving on to what makes her happiest, writing for children. She has published both picture books and early readers chapter books that have received widespread recognition. These include My Trip to La La Land, Just Like Papa, Pedro and the Big Broom, and The Miracle on Sundarbag Street, which won the Neve Book Award 2021 from the Emerging Readers category, and the Special Jury Award by FICCI Publishing for Best Book for Children. Nandita also enjoys making music on her piano, bird watching, pottering about her terrace garden, and spending time with her daughters, all of which are great sources of book inspiration. So now may I welcome on stage Miss Nandita.
Thanks for coming here and choosing to be here on this lovely Sunday afternoon. I'm Nandita Da Cunha. I'm from Mumbai. And I'm guessing we're all here because we either love to read books, write stories, share books, teach from books. Some way we have books connecting each other. No matter which category you belong to, this is quite a fascinating topic that the Neve team asked me to speak on. Why do we use real life heroes in our stories? And when they first sent me this topic and they said, can you talk half an hour about this? I began wondering why me, and I went back and I saw that the last 5 books I've written, they're all fiction. I'm a fiction writer. 4 out of the 5 had roots in real life stories. They were all based on something, inspired by someone, true life stories or something. I don't think I consciously set out to do that. It takes talks like these for me to find the thread that links the kind of stories we write. So now I began working backwards and started asking myself, if I had to analyze these choices, what did choosing real stories do to my writing, do to strengthen the narratives? And for that, I began to think of all the events in which I've shared these books. So I've just put down my thoughts on how these have helped my writing. And the first question that, before we get into reasons really to ask ourselves is, what is a hero? And this should be an easy enough question. But when I began Googling, 100 very radically different definitions did come up. I'm going to ask your help. I mean, can you picture in your mind your real life hero? Your parent, Harry Potter, Mahatma Gandhi, picture your hero. And what would you say a hero is? Would anyone like to share what you believe is a hero? Yes?
I think a hero is somebody who makes a big change and makes sure that it's better.
Makes the world a better place. Thank you, lovely sharing. We have one more.
I think a hero is someone who protects people and helps them and tries, does not give up and always is fighting for something who is their cause and that affects them a lot.
There was so much packed in that wonderful answer. Stands by people, stands for something, an idealist. So many different values that come up when we talk of heroes. And I'm going to share the 2 ends of definition, drastic ends of definition that I found. The first was a way we used to define heroes a lot in, the olden times. I noticed when you talk of Greek mythology, classics, a hero was someone who charged in. Maybe there was an element of danger, self-sacrifice. I mean, think Bollywood movies, someone who's saving others, saving the world. And nowadays, more and more, maybe in psychology journals and the way people are looking at heroes, it's a very watered down version. Teachers are now saying each and every one of us is a hero inside. So I began to question, and as with many things, I believe, heroes do lie somewhere in between. I love these 2 definitions by American writers, and I don't think I need to go too much into it because our 2 friends really shared a lot of that with us. The qualities of someone who is intent on making this a better place for people. I think it didn't take Maya Angelou. We had our own sharing in this session. be it big or small, someone who tries to make a change in some way for others. And now I'll really come to, so why use these real life examples? And I had 5 points that I could try and explain through my books. The first is connect. When I do events with my stories and I share and I read from the stories, we do fun activities, and then there comes this moment when I say, and did you know this story was based on a real life story? There's a story behind that story. And I feel the atmosphere in the room change. There is a charge. Suddenly, the tension, the drama, the intrigue, they become real. There is a connect. This is a story I wrote that was published 3 years ago, The Miracle on Sundarbag Street. I just did a reading. And it's about this young girl, Zara. And those beautiful illustrations by Priya Kurian show Zara. And she was in a very difficult place. Her mother had passed away. She used to go and sit in a dump yard every day till an old teacher re-entered her life, Miss Guppy. And Miss Guppy planted an idea in her head that, this old dump yard used to be a garden. And the more she spoke about the garden, the more Zara wanted to do something about it. And the story goes on to talk about how they bring everyone together on this Sundarbag street, and there's a miracle. They convert it into a beautiful green space back again. So when I speak with children, we unpack layers and layers upon different things in the book. We talk about greenery, environment, what it does for us, what we can do for it. And then I share this story of the Dream Grove, which is a community project in my neighborhood, my very neighborhood. And that really was the inspiration for this story. A group of people who came together every Sunday, walked on an old plot of land, a BMC-owned plot of land, and performed a people-led miracle, truly. And it was not only my inspiration, I've actually borrowed so many elements from that story. From the small things like a mulberry tree that fruited after 20 years, the small details to how they celebrate birthdays there now, how their lives are so strongly entwined with that beautiful green space that they've built up. And it is in the telling of this story and sharing with people that everyone starts making connections. And they draw on their life, and then they all, follow this up. I very often get, particularly on this book, emails, letters, talking about small projects, small ways in which they could have done something in their building, community, school, and so on. And that's the real Dream Grove, before and after. For my launch, we actually had them come and share their story, and as much as my story that I shared, having these real life heroes in front of them made it very, very real for the audience. I think a second reason really is, and I have sort of touched on this, a call to action. Why do we write stories? You enjoy them in the moment, but for me, powerful stories are ones that linger in your mind, that make you question, ponder, that stay with you. And if you're lucky enough, even bring about action. And by action, I don't mean big heroic actions, but actions big and small. For example, we all know about 13-year-old Greta Thunberg's individual struggle against, to bring about climate change awareness that turned into a larger movement, and how she brought everyone together. But a book that I love, and I'm sharing here, is not a biography about Greta. She was born in 1900, and then she visited the school, and then she blah, blah, blah. No, it's not an end-to-end story of her life. Greta and the Giants is like a fairy tale. It's an allegory. What is that? They use the symbolism of a forest. So Greta is a young girl in a forest, and all the animals of the forest come and say, "Help us, save us, the giants are coming and taking over our forest. They're cutting down the trees," and there is excitement and intrigue in this story. And Greta being Greta, she tries and does what she can as one person. She stands there holding a banner, and that one person grows to 5, 10, 15, and you have the beautiful illustrations when all the animals come together. This story has a beautiful ending. The giants come to a wonderful realization. The forest is a forest again. Sorry, spoilers. But there is a nice line, there's a nice page at the end of the story that says, Greta's story ended happily, but the rest of us are still living through that story. Our story hasn't an ending yet. So there's a note of hope, and there's also a note of reality. And more beautiful, it ends with small ways in which we can make a change. As children, as human beings, be it bicycling to school or eating local, they give small actionable ways in which we can be Gretas. So this was a beautiful, imaginative way of using real life stories. And again, you read it and you say, she did it, because, you read that matter. She did it in a small way and it made a difference. Call to action. I had to put this up in. I spoke about, the Sundar Bagh sort of post-reading effects. And this was a letter from one of the students where I did a session. And that's his, it's not just a drawing, it's the cover page of a book he has written. And that's him, Pavit, the zero waste hero. So he said, I want to be the hero of my own book. He designed the cover, he sent it to me. And he said it's inspired by, how we can do our own things. But he even stopped there. He has started a zero waste period in his school, which they used to have some free period once in 2 weeks. Everyone bring in waste, and we can talk about different ways we can use it, because this is one of the messages we discussed in Sundar Bagh. Blown away by these ideas, small ideas that can come from hearing about real life stories. A very interesting third reason was Unsung Stories. This was a book I've written. How many of you have heard of Annapurna Devi? Yes, that's the reaction I do normally get. A few connoisseurs of Indian or lovers of Indian classical music. I saw a documentary on her life, and I was fascinated. I'm a musician, and my teacher was my mother. That's where my small connections are with this absolute maestro. And when I heard about her life, she was an absolute maestro in the sitar, in the sur bahar, a very big instrument for women. And she came from a time when she was not allowed to learn, because girls weren't taught this, the instruments. So Baba Alauddin Khan, her father, began teaching her brother, as was normal and natural. And certain kinds of talent cannot be hidden. And there was a very interesting anecdote in her early life by which her talent got discovered in that one moment, and she managed to change the mindset of a very strong-willed man, her father, and he began teaching her. And the rest, as they say, is history. And I was fascinated by it. Many years later, as things are, she began to be known more for who she was associated with. She was the wife of Pandit Ravi Shankar, and things like that became more in the press known. But she herself was a recluse. She stopped performing. And as a musician, and in the musician community, we love performing, we love the claps, the adulates, the encore, one more, awards. Who doesn't love awards? She didn't want any of that. When I tried to reach out to her and I said, I'm writing a book. And she said, why? Because I love this quality that for you it's about music. That's the purest form of worship. For you, the end goal is music itself. So why are you writing about it? That's defeating the purpose. She didn't want to be written about, and things like that. It took a little getting around. But how else would some stories be known if we didn't write about them? And the way I chose to do it is, I, again, haven't written a detailed biography of her life. I've picked on that one anecdote I spoke about, when her music was discovered, serendipity, how her father eavesdropped and listened to her talent, and how that unfolded when she was a child. And what typically happens is, children read about this one incident, they get the essence of her values, of who she was, the personality, the talent, dedication to music, and then they go and they Google more about her, and they come to know all the rest of the facts anyway. But fictionalizing it, taking us through the mind, and it's written in first person, is one of the reasons why, you use real life. That is bottom right. Annapurna Devi with her father, Baba Alauddin Khan, and this is the magic in my fingers. My favorite author, Michael Morpurgo, one of my favorites. And he, too many books to name, but something he does in each and every one of his books, he weaves fact and fiction. Not just fact and fiction, there are personal history, stories other people have told him, historical fiction, he'll have different settings, and he'll weave them all into a single story in a very, very fascinating way. This is just one example, based on the story of a real-life hero, Walter Tull, and he was the first black soldier in the First World War, and he was also an ace footballer, and he faced racism on both counts. But he didn't write about Walter Tull. He wrote about a young boy, also Michael, whose grandfather he discovered one fine day was this man in the war who wasn't receiving a medal, though he was nominated for it because of racism. And what does he do now to change that? So he's taken the essence of that story, and he said the same thing in many interviews. This was a story that deserved to be heard. These were the stories that we may not have known wanted it. And I love that line. I'm not really a writer, and the sheer honesty of I'm really a liar, because all of us are. We take the truth and then we twist it in ways you may or may not recognize what comes from it. We change it a bit. Reason 4 of 5, unbelievable but true, because, next slide, there are some stories that if we didn't know they were real, we might not even take them for true. I remember I watched this movie, The Wolf on Wall Street, and coming out of the theater, I heard someone say that if we didn't know that this was based on real life, it would have been so over the top. We would have said, this is wild imagination, but sometimes truth is, as they really say, the old adage, stranger than fiction. And I heard of Sujata Sahu. She is in the top left. Sujata Sahu's wonderful journey. She returned to India, to Gurgaon, after being a teacher in the States, and luckily for her, she was a trekker. So that's what she did on a vacation, and once she went to Ladakh, and on one of those treks all by herself, she lost her way, second lucky thing, and she came across a school with 2 children and I think 5 teachers. It was skewed, and where are the rest of the children? This is the school, 2 children, 5. And she discovered that those 2 children had traveled about an hour and a half or 2 hours each way on foot to get to that school, which is what drove their teachers likewise to make very similar journeys. And she went walking further, and she found another second isolated, similar incident, and she said, what can I do as a person to make change? She went back, she thought about it, took 2 years, bringing together a few more people, and she set up a foundation called 17,000 Feet Foundation. And they do fantastic work with schools in Ladakh. 17,000 feet is because that's the highest they've ever been to work with a school in remote Ladakh. And if, I've been there, so if any of you are familiar with the terrain, that is the journey, the altitude, the climb, everything almost seems to be against you sometimes. And what did she do in these schools? She set up libraries. She gave them books, she set up playgrounds, things you take for granted in a school. She didn't do anything very different from giving them the basics. And she started a program, which is the program I actually first heard about before I heard of her, because a couple of my friends joined up their program, posted their photo. They call it voluntourism. So you could volunteer for them to be a part of these projects, and be a tourist in an authentic way. They would take you around Ladakh. So I found that very interesting. I've written fiction. My trip to La La Land is about a young girl, Tavishi, who's kind of dragged by her very active do-gooder mom, who wants to go to Ladakh and become a volunteer, in this project and set up libraries in a remote school. And Tavishi's like, Mom, school holidays in a school? She's like, Tavishi, you love books. I love reading them, not climbing up mountains, trekking on donkeys with them. And the whole story is written in the format of a diary through Tavishi's eyes, because she documents her entire stay in Ladakh for a period of just 1 week, 7 days that changed her life, changed the way she viewed the world, her whole experience, and then she comes back a very changed person. So at the back of the book, I was kind enough that the 17,000 Feet Foundation shared their photographs, again, making a fairly unbelievable but true story come real. Sometimes stories are unbelievable but true because they take place in a very unfamiliar context, when you're far removed from the place. When I do sessions, there are many children who haven't not about been to Ladakh, hadn't heard of Ladakh, and it seemed a very different space. So seeing those real photographs, hearing about the work done by the foundation, really helped them connect with this story of Taveshi in Delhi. And lastly, highlighting struggles. Again, this may not be something I consciously set out to do, but some of my stories do have this theme running through them of, communities that can come together, make a change, that do enjoy their victories. I'm from Goa originally. Can we have the next slide? And over the years, as I live in Bombay, where I travel back to Goa whenever I can. So I see it at these intervals, and I've seen how it changes. There's no black and white here, shades of gray. But as it progresses, as it develops, one infrastructure project after another, a lot of the Goa isn't the Goa I was used to, the green and beautiful and verdant Goa. And I wrote a book called Pedru and the Big Boom, set in a mining village in Goa. And it was very inspired by a couple. It just started with an elderly couple, Norma and Cloud Alvarez, and how they took up illegal mining in Goa. 2 lawyers, and they moved the Supreme Court and got a verdict in their favor to the extent they were able to shut down illegal mines across Goa through a foundation called Goa Foundation. People they brought together, people's movements. So what I wanted to highlight really was the process they went through, the challenges they faced. And so we have Pedru. Pedro is an 8-year-old, and he's not a big hero or a champ at the start of the book. No, he actually wants to run away from home. He's never been allowed to leave Goa because his father, Pai, and his cashew nut plantations have ensured that they don't travel anywhere. They're just stuck there, and he thinks he's fed up of living in this village, Ratnagaon, until something happens that threatens his village, Ratnagaon. And that's a new mining project that starts, and how it changes life for him and his friends, and what they do and how they get together to make a difference. So that was how I wrote that story. So I've been talking a lot, these points about how using real life heroes have added depth to my story, connect with readers. But a very valid question could be, so why fiction? Why not? There's so many genres now, and I'm not just going to say non-fiction. There's so many ways you can tell a story, and every format is as valid as another. You could have narrative non-fiction, biography, memoir, so many ways you can collaborate. But this is just a personal answer of why I fictionalize elements of truth. One is you're able to look at these stories and think of what was the essence of it that attracted you. What were the qualities of the hero, him or her, that drew you to what they did? What are the values that you want to share with others? And focus on those moments, those anecdotes, that personality, rather than, let's say, statistically an end-to-end discussion on that particular group or a person. Present alternative. Now, this is very interesting. Take Pedru and the Big Boom, a mining story. And I remember I wrote it with an ending that I shared with my publishers. And they got back, and then, they are also an NGO that does very active work. And they said, we want to discuss the ending. Because there are so many ways the story can end. Because in Goa, there are so many ways that mines have been impacted. There are some where they've just had to shut down. It was too late to do anything about them. Some where the community got together and restored the mines. Some where the community itself said, now, mining is all we know, but let us take over and work on the mines. And we discussed which of these are we sharing with children. And we want them to know that even though there are very few that have been able to restore, and statistically very few that have been able to go back to what it was, it's possible. It's possible if you come together. There was a little hope in that ending, and we actually therefore chose an ending that is not the thing that happens most frequently, but has happened. So presenting children, you get to choose the kind of story arc that you want to take, what you want to present. And for the last point, I'm going to actually go to the next slide, and I'm not taking you through the slide, it's very complicated, but I'm just saying, there is a reader for so many different types of books. It's not just fiction and non-fiction. There's a whole gamut of genres today that lie between these: creative non-fiction, narrative non-fiction. And I grew up as a fiction lover. a fiction lover. So I think what happened, I mean, we of course grew up on the faraway tree and are in it Blytons, and I missed out on perhaps hearing and reading, I now feel in retrospect, a lot of stories because I didn't pick up a wider variety of books. And I think for those lovers of fiction, this is just one small way for that set of readers to bring them into the wider fold, tell them some of the real stories, because this really does happen. Post-story, Googling and finding out more about what actually happened, how you can be a part of it, tends to happen. How am I doing on time? Okay. And that is why fiction. So how does one go about, I mean, honestly, it would be just really much easier to make it up, to use your imagination. A lot of people have said, oh, that's nice, you just found a story and you used it. That wouldn't have needed too much work. But, oh my God, there are real challenges for all those out there who are writers and who want to sort of see how this works for you. And the first is research, research, and more research. For example, hint, don't pick up on writing about a woman who's a recluse and who doesn't, who's not in the public eye for the last 40 years. You need to go out there, find ways to speak to people who know people, and get the stories you want. And even still, the second point, you're always walking that tightrope, maintaining this balance between elements you want to keep in and elements you won't. You're entering the mind of someone, and you're always careful when you're fictionalizing a person, which means you're speaking the person's voice. You're imagining yourself in their shoes in a certain period of time. You're giving them dialogues, perhaps. You're presuming a lot. So to actually think about how that person was in that time, how they thought and felt and interacted with each other, it's difficult. Choose a point of focus that I spoke about, that what part of that story do you really retain? And approvals. Very important. Even though this is fiction, something I'm careful about doing is, when you're talking about a person, you need for them to be comfortable with you doing that. And maybe a person, a foundation, a movement, involve them while you're writing that story. And even after all that, there is a publisher talking to his poor author, and he says, our legal department has looked over your wonderfully researched memoir and says, please remove all exaggerations, inaccuracies, slander. Though it may be easier to just add a few wizards and dragons and publish it as fantasy. And I have been, I really relate to this because I've really been through that. Are we comfortable putting this out there? Can we presume that this is, what she may have thought and felt in that moment? It's walking a tightrope. This is one last question that the wonderful Neve team put to me when they were saying, can you talk about real-life heroes? Why use real-life heroes, and must they be larger than life? Do we want to make them too realistic? Then will people sort of not get that inspired by the pendulum? Or do we make them superbly heroic, but then they might be so much larger than life that you don't even relate to them, then they're superheroes perhaps. So it is a bit of a pendulum, a little bit of a balance. But I'll leave you with this last quote that I really love by a writer called Unsung Stories. And next slide. And what he says is, and we end the way we began, talking about heroes, and they may do things big or small, but the things they do, the values they espouse are larger than life. And what we have to do is find that essence and find ways in which we can make sure we can share them in our stories. So that really was what I wanted to share about some of my books and why I have found great value in using inspiration from real life stories.
I just wanted to ask that where do you, find out these real stories and write books on them?
Sweetie, I think the stories are all around us, every day, every moment. The stories I shared with you, for example, the Dream Grove, it was just next door, my neighborhood where I live. It was in my face. I look around and I ask myself this question, is there a story in this? Is there a story in that? I'm with my children and their friends, and they're saying some really funny things. Just a single comment, a single crib, is there a story in this? Could this be the start of a story? So stories are all around us. For real life inspiration, I pick up the newspapers in the morning, and there's a story in literally every headline. So many sources from which we gather stories. You keep your eyes open and you will find them. Yes.
कभी ऐसा हुआ है कि you started writing, you had a belief कि this is a story, you wrote, you are halfway, you're narrating, you're listening to the drafts, and उसको छोड़ देना पड़ा, and then you have to come back with a new idea again, and how do you do that?
You know, I was in a playwriting program before I began writing for children, and we had 4 sessions over 2 years, 2 2-week residential sessions, 6 months apart. And every time we had a session, we wrote a play, we had a draft, and by the end of the draft, they said, there was an activity. What is that scene? Imagine you're throwing your play into the fire. If it's burning, what is that one scene you would go into a burning fire and save? We would choose one scene. Very good. Come back next time with this one scene and a new story. And that's where I learned that you took that story and tore it apart and started afresh. And when you've written it from 4 different perspectives, my story was written from a mother's perspective. They said, next time just rewrite it from the daughter's perspective. So this isn't cut, copy, paste, edit. You don't do that on a Word document. But what I learned from that was the richness that you get from looking at the same story in so many different ways, from different perspectives, writing maybe even in a different format. Make it into a short story, how has it changed? And why I'm telling you this long story is at the end of it, what came out, I think all I retained was a theme and essence that I started off with, and I had such a rich story that had bits and elements of the 4 different sessions. Yeah, that taught me editing. Yes. How do I choose which stories I want? You know, a story is not just about, for me, that you write it for a period of time, and then, you send it around, and maybe you get lucky enough that it gets published, and even after a year you work with the publisher, and then you go and you have to do events based on it. So you have to live with that story for a very long time. So for me it's very personal. If I love, or if I'm passionate or drawn to that theme, I don't think of it from, is this a burning topic in the world right now, or would people find this a hot topic? I say, oh my God, this is a musician, this is music, it speaks to me, very honestly, a personal connect. So I will live with this story and even be as excited about it in the 30th session as the first. So just a story that personally appeals to me. Those are the stories I pick up.
Anything plain and simple is boring. Something that has got a little bit more of masala and everything is kind of interesting. Maybe all the stories that you come across are not really as interesting. So what percentage of the story is actually the story of somebody you're inspired from, and how much more decoration do you add to it?
What often happens, and this is interesting, I begin with the story, so that is real in the research, and I let it take me places. So in my first draft, there may be a lot of details I add. And later, when I find myself taking out details, I go more and more to the essence of what was originally there. I think what I add to a narrative is more from a story structuring perspective, giving it an arc. Some of these fictionalized, and why I do fiction is it allows me to do some of that. But what you want people to take away when they leave that story is often goes back to the original story, the original values of that hero or heroine, really. Yeah. And I try even in the small detailing, we spoke of Sunderbag Street, so even if it's at the mulberry cake that, they made and they celebrated, and even in the small details, not just in the bigger perspective, to bring in the true life story so that people have that connect as well. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you.